The Legend of Spyro: The Eternal Night is a 3D action platformer, the second entry in the Legend of Spyro trilogy. And just like its title may suggest, Eternal Night is exceptionally morose and moody, primarily occupied with existential brooding, poetically pontificating on the pageantry of shadows, in both metaphorical and literal fashion. This tale takes Spyro across besieged and battered ruins, through pirate-infested, poisonous forests, and into celestial layers of old draconic lore. The tone is ceaselessly ethereal, oppressive, and hopeless. The story speaks of evil souls, ill omens, ancient treason, and coupled with the gloomy blue lighting and haunting, intense soundtrack, it puts the dark in dark fantasy. The game's narrative themes are suitably sorrowful to match, focusing on questions of identity, purpose, and destiny. Throughout the entire adventure, Spyro is left uncertain of his role, wandering with aimless aggravation as the world descends into darkness. And when he at last comes upon the answer, he's simply told that all is hopeless, that he hasn't a chance to fend off the overcoming tide of despair. This is both reflected and refuted by Cinder's own story, which runs parallel to Spyro's. Cinder, having spent her whole life shrouded in shadow and corrupted by its touch, is constantly beckoned back to the darkness, but each time she refuses. Despite her torturous life, she always chooses light. That alone proves insufficient to stem the tide of evil, however. Spyro and Cinder may have been capable to save themselves through their sheer force of will, but they are helpless to rescue the world entire. They can only shield themselves from the impending apocalypse, as fate itself foretold. In the end, Eternal Night's themes are left deliberately unresolved. Is it true that the call of darkness is always greater, or is Cinder's personal choice proof enough that there is yet hope in this world? To match this dark tone, the gameplay itself is highly challenging, thoughtful, and surprisingly brutal. You're given a variety of new, powerful combat options, but the enemies are made more powerful to match. You die fast in this game, and it demands your constant, critical attention if you wish to succeed. Enemies come in countless droves, mercilessly ripping Spyro to shreds. More than ever, crowd control is the name of the game. You have to expertly navigate a veritable sea of sadistic opposition, expertly utilizing your new powers to turn the tide. Some of the fights were so intense that they had me actually anxious, and I love that. Again, it perfectly matches the game's atmosphere. We're not just talking about a series of simple arenas here either. Eternal Night tries to inject as much variety as possible into every enemy encounter. You don't just have to think about your foes, you also must consider elevation, environmental hazards, and most importantly, the surplus of shadowy pits to hurl yourself and your adversaries into. A commendable effort has gone into crafting challenging and memorable combat design. It's good stuff. Just like the brawling, the platforming has gotten quite a glow up from its predecessor. Previously, it was relegated to simple traversal, but in Eternal Night, it's an event. Thanks to the introduction of Dragon Time, which allows Spyro to distort time itself, there are incredible opportunities for precision platforming, demanding a high degree of skill and patience alike. What's more, the platforming is integrated far more naturally into the environment, encouraging active pathfinding on the player's part. You have to deconstruct the scenery, and then piece it back together bit by bit as you nervously hop and glide to victory, or to your swift demise. It could go either way. Basically, Eternal Night is an action platformer where both the action and platforming are brutal, but more than reasonable. Like, sure, I failed a bunch and had to retry with new approaches. I tweaked my movement, tried different breath types, attacked and evaded at different intervals. In other words, I was, learning. That thing you do when you're given feedback and internalize said feedback for self-improvement purposes. That thing which video games are uniquely good at encouraging. So yeah, I think it's good. That said, I don't want to make Eternal Night sound perfect or anything of the sort. Most of the bosses are comically cheesable and bafflingly broken, with special shoutouts to the final confrontation. And there are many areas clearly lacking in polish. Enemy designs and enemy AI are often reused from the first game, sometimes without proper consideration for their place in Eternal Night's design. This is a plainly rushed product, but I found the lows far less compelling than the highs. If you're in the mood to play a dark fantasy action platformer, you could do a lot worse than this, and frankly, I'm not sure you could do too much better.